Welcome. Oh, it's yeah, it's quite loud. This is the August 13th meeting of the Community Oversight Advisory Board, and I'm going to tell you what our charge is according to the settlement agreement. You can also see that it's listed here on our chart. The job is to independently assess the implementation of the settlement agreement, to make recommendations to the parties and the COCO on additional actions, advise the Chief of Police and the Police Commissioner on strategies to improve community relations, provide the community with information on the agreement and its implementation, contribute to the development and implementation of a Portland Police Bureau Community Engagement and Outreach Plan, the CEO plan, and receive public comments and concerns. That is our job. We're glad to have you here this evening, and I'm going to turn it over to Mandy for a minute and let her tell you about the housekeeping things.
They know, but there, that's me. Oh, good, you can hear me. Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to go over a few basic things with everyone. First, you probably saw, but there's food outside. Please help yourselves. Please help yourselves to food. We want it all gone by the time we're done tonight. Restrooms are, if you go down this way past where the food tables are and take a left, if you go down that hallway, that's where restrooms are. And also, I just wanted to make people aware of fire exits, just for the issue of safety. So obviously the door that I'm sure most people came in is one. We actually have an exit that's right off here in the corner is another. Just so that you're aware of those. And there are 3 exits outside in the lobby, one on either side right here and one down that hallway where the restrooms are. Also, accommodations. I wanted to make everyone aware that Brad Taylor is here. He's our mental health specialist. He's down in the back and just waved his hand and stood up. So if anyone in the room needs any kind of support during this meeting at all, please go and see Brad for sure. If we also have, let's see, there's, I don't see any children in the room tonight, but we did bring some toys to keep little ones or grown-ups occupied if you need to go take a break and play a bit. If in the future, if there's any sort of accommodations that you might need for future meetings, please don't hesitate to contact us. And I know that Kathleen has her card outside. You can also I think I'll make sure my card's out there as well. So please don't hesitate to call us if there's anything you need for future meetings. And then, I wanted to make people aware also, we are doing an experiment tonight with live streaming of our meetings. So right now there will be 2 people who are watching right now, and we're testing to see if this live streaming actually works. So Tom Christoph, who is part of the COCO team from Chicago, is one of the people who's participating in the live streaming, and Captain Marshman is the other person. So as long as this works well for our next meeting, we will have live streaming up for all people so that we can have access for folks who couldn't make it to the meeting tonight. And then finally, I just wanted to make everyone aware that we wanted to do voting a little bit differently from now on. And so we're going to actually do an individual roll call for votes. And that way we're all clear on who voted what way, and I'm clear for minutes. And then additionally, we also have minutes from the July 9th COAB meeting, so our last COAB meeting, that are in the agenda packets, and we'll be reviewing those today and discussing and hopefully approving or amending. There might have been a few parts here where I might have missed something, so definitely looking for people's feedback to make sure those minutes are accurate. And that's all I have.
Okay, you need to know that Emmanuel Price, who was the chair for the executive committee, has resigned and is replaced by Bud Fulis, who was the vice chair. Emmanuel's resignation triggered the appointment of Siadam Edmo, who is a member of the Human Rights Commission and who may think that we're meeting downtown. I've corrected her twice on that, so I hope she gets here. She automatically is a member of the executive committee, given the structure and what is called for in the settlement agreement or in the bylaws and agreement. So welcome to Seattle when she gets here. And I want to make you aware that Dennis Rosenbaum and Amy Watson are here from Chicago to be with us, and they're going to share with us and give us a brief update on what the COCL is doing.
Hello. Thank you for having us. Amy and I are both just going to say a couple words quickly. First, although Emmanuel's not here, I really want to thank him for his service to this group and for his leadership and the time he put in. And I want to thank Bud for being willing to step up and do this. That's great. You know, our first quarterly report was out, and I just want to start by thanking you for all the very constructive and helpful comments and feedback, both from the last meeting and written comments. And as you can see, we listened to just about everything you said. And so you can see that, and the list of changes are there. And Amy, why don't you tell them about the scheduled changing in the format of things, of timing?
Right, we have a change to the schedule for the quarterly reports that hopefully will be a sigh of relief for folks because it gives a little breathing room. But in order to get back in sync with the PPB quarterly reports, the next one comes out August 15th. Per the settlement agreement, the COCL, our report's supposed to come out 45 days after that. So we're adjusting our schedule to match that. So the next draft of the quarterly report will be posted online, I believe it's October 1st, and then presented to the full COAB on October 8th at that meeting. So that shifts our schedule a little bit, and everything will go then 3 months out from there. So hopefully that provides a little bit of a buffer room and some sort of structure to plan moving forward.
Also, in terms of what we're doing, I know, first of all, I should just thank everybody here, because I know that each of you has done much more work than you thought you were going to do in this process. Amy and I call each other all the time and say, what did we get into here? You know, it's just taking up most of our lives, and so we know you're the same, and we really appreciate that. We're working on digging down, drilling down more in compliance in all 7 areas that are in there: force, training, mental health services, crisis intervention, employee information systems, officer accountability, and community engagement. And so what's going on out there in each of these areas, what's being done, what is the level of compliance, what's the quality of compliance. So our next report will have a little more detail. In some of these areas, we'll drill down even further than others. We're working, for example, in setting up the metrics that are needed here, really, that don't necessarily, some are in place and some need to be modified and expanded so that you and us and the community can monitor the changes in the Portland Police Bureau over time. And Amy, why don't you want to talk about the biannual report? Okay.
Yeah, as part of the settlement agreement, we're required to do biannual outcome assessments and provide a report. So we're working on the first one that we hope to have out in the next few weeks, I believe by the end of August, beginning of September. And when that is actually out, we will make sure the COAB gets that. But for that report, our first one will be similar to the first quarterly report. In some of it, we'll really go over kind of our plans. Because right now we're really looking at the data systems that PPB has and determining what needs to be, sort of modified so we can actually get the data and outcomes to assess that. We're also looking at our plans for additional ways of collecting data outside of those data systems so we can really do a good job looking at the impact, looking at compliance, but then also the impact of compliance. So some of the things that we've done in our first report we'll be able to talk about. We did a survey of PPB personnel this spring, and we'll have some of those findings in that report. The community survey is currently out in the field, so we won't have that data back to report on, but that's something that we have for upcoming reports. We also are in the process of planning a mental health contact survey where we will ask people that have had contacts with police around a mental health issue to provide their perspective on how they experience that. Kind of in tandem with that, we're working on developing a version for family members and caregivers too, to capture that experience. So we have some independent sort of sources of information on how things are going and if the reforms being made by PPB are actually impacting people in the community.
Good. And the community survey finally is in the field, and some of you may have seen it. But again, thank you all for giving feedback on that. It was very helpful. I also want to thank the city for working hard to get it in the field and get. This is a big effort, and so everyone, people in Portland, throughout the city, are having an opportunity to comment on this now. And but it oversamples African Americans and Latinos. It will do an inadequate job of capturing some of the other vulnerable groups that we've talked about in these meetings, and therefore I know that the COCO group here and you guys are working on some focus groups and other things with various communities that could be affected. So I think we just want to thank you all, and we look forward to working with you in a coordinated way in the future here to bring about the kinds of reforms that are needed in the Portland Police Bureau to make it to the point where, force is something that's used rarely and only when absolutely necessary, and that there's positive relationships here and a transparent relationship with the community. So, okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Now we're going to look at the minutes. You have the minutes in your packet, the minutes from the last meeting. And to reassure you, we will be working hard to get the minutes that you don't have updated and to you at a future time. This is from the most recent meeting. Do you want to talk about it?
Oh, I didn't realize, I don't have much, I don't know what to say about it.
Okay, well, so have you had a chance to review them? I need a motion to, if there is discussion, after I get the motion, I'd like to have the discussion. Motion to accept the minutes. Yes? Okay. Okay, so now is there discussion on that? Do you find things that need to be modified, changed, eliminated? Yes?
Please? Is that okay, or?
Well, they were sent out so that, in hopes that you would read them before you got here. If you'd like to take a couple of minutes, go ahead, and we'll do a couple of minutes. Yes, bud.
While folks are doing that, just on the very first item, review, discuss, approve bylaw amendments, it was Sharon Mirren who moved to approve the bylaws. Myron, I'm sorry. And Sharon Maxwell who seconded that.
Okay, V.
I was attending via teleconferencing at the time, and I'm not sure if my concerns were adequately heard, if at all. And I'd like the record to reflect that the mental health, the people with lived experience vehemently are against any sort of exclusionary policy making coming out of the executive committee. Anything that exhibits the sort that moves away from inclusion is exclusion, and we are vehemently opposed to that. I'd like the record to reflect that.
Okay.
Oh, your name is spelled wrong? D-L. Okay, thanks.
Okay. So we have any more discussion on the minutes? All in favor of accepting the minutes with the revision as proposed by V, please signify, how do you want to do this roll call thing? Just, let's start with Tom and just say who you are and yay or nay. Excuse me? Okay.
Wallace, yes.
Jimmy Johnson, yes.
Avell Gordley, yes.
Siadam Edmo, abstain.
Yes. Sweet yes.
Laquita Lanford, yes.
Okay.
Catherine Gardner, yes.
Great.
Okay. Any nays? You have one abstention. Okay, so the minutes are accepted. Next on the agenda is subcommittee reports. And we want to start with the Community Engagement Subcommittee. Jimmy Johnson.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jimmy Johnson with the Community Engagement Outreach Plan Subcommittee Chair. We met last Thursday, and currently, one of our first thing was just to get a consistent meeting place. I'm gonna just put that out there right quick, and we got one secured, and that meeting place is gonna be over at the North Precinct, off MLK and Emerson. And one of the reasons we thought that it might be a good place to meet is because it's a good building to use, and it's right in the police precinct, the North Precinct. So, and part of our plan with the community engagement is also to work with police officers closely in crafting out ways to help make policing better for all involved. And as it relates to the settlement agreement, meeting with the officers and police personnel as well as community, so get us all involved. So that was a big thing to me to have a study meeting place right there in the community and right in the North Precinct. So we got that secured for, well, I don't know how many months, but for a few months anyway. And our normal meetings, just a heads up to everyone, our CIOP meetings is on Thursdays, the third Thursday of each month, from 6 to 8 p.m. So we just want to put that out there. Some other things we talked about last week and we want to consult with is working with, of course, the mental health piece, the mental health engagement, far as doing the focus groups. We're looking at doing focus groups as relates to the survey. And one thing about the focus groups, we want to do kind of maybe 2 or 3 with the mental health community. We want to make sure they're engaged and involved in what's going on. And so with that, we haven't outlined how we're going to make it look, but with the help of my colleagues on the mental health subcommittee, we'll figure out ways to make that focus group to make it work and make it how it looks. And as well as survey goes, you all know the surveys are out now. They're out and they're being circulated, and they have been overrepresented. There's overrepresentation for people, African Americans and different populations that need to have. We want to make sure we reach out and touch. That we make sure they get the surveys. So they're out there. I think after the 1st of September, sometime shortly thereafter, we'll be getting surveys that be starting to trickle in and come in, and some of them are coming in now. And then we'll go from there as far as doing some actually some visiting. When I say visiting some places, some different places. For example, neighborhood associations, the community engagement outreach plan. We want to go out and visit several neighborhood associations. When I say that, I think there's a group of neighborhood associations. I think there's seven
Coalition, neighborhood coalitions.
7 coalitions. We want to hit all of those at within the next 4 to 6 weeks. We want to hit those, and we want to do that on a personal basis. One of us, and when I say one of us, could be any of us from the COAB, but that would be willing to be okay to do that. We'll set the times up. We'll get that together. And that's the plan for us more engagement, more outreach. Let's see here. And we'll definitely want to schedule a time. This is future, and this is maybe another month away or 3 to 4 weeks away to meet with the chief of police, the commanders of the different precincts, to meet with them and talk with them and engage with them about the community engagement outreach and how they see things going and what they see, and get input from each other. So we want to really collaborate and talk with what we see, what's going on, and how we can make this better as far as engaging in outreach. One of my personal preferences too is just the old school, just some old time. It's back in the days when we used to have community policing here in Portland. I'm sure we still have it. I like to, when we engage with some of the commanders and officers, we talk more about that, how that would look, and how we can just how that can work, and work within the framework of the officers' normal duties, the officers' duties, and what they've signed up for. So those are some things we want to look at. And that's about where we're at right now. But again, I think right now we're moving in a positive direction. But it's work, and it's a lot of push and pull and give and take and work. But it's worth doing. So with the support of the board and outreach with the other board, I feel pretty okay with where we're at right now, where we're going. So that's probably into that.
Thank you, Jimmy. Next committee is the Use of Force Committee. Tom Steenson.
I'm the Vice Chair of the Data Systems Use of Force Compliance Subcommittee. Sharon Maxwell is the chair. She'll be here a little later. At the suggestion of Jonas Geisler with the DOJ, we've adopted, at least to date, a model of using work groups to get our work done. We currently have 3 work groups. We have a use of force work group that I'm chairing. We have a bias-free policing work group that I'm chairing, and we have a data systems work group that Bud Fulis is chairing. We have some community members that are either serving on the work groups or informally consulting and helping us. The use of force work group has, at the request of the COCO, taken on some review and formulated some proposed recommendations that have gone through the subcommittee. Those are being presented tonight for the COAB to consider. We are also, as that work group, working on proposed recommendations to the main use of force directive 1010. We've made, I think, significant progress. We hope to have recommendations to the subcommittee at its meeting next month, and then for the COAB at the first available meeting. The bias-free policing work group likewise has been meeting. We are in the process of taking recommendations to the subcommittee at next Monday's meeting, and there are other recommendations we're looking at. The data systems work group, in talking to Bud, is frankly somewhat stalled right now. There has been some staffing issues which I think may have been resolved, but if I understand correctly, Bud is having difficulty getting access to data, difficulty getting access to the Bureau's data systems, difficulty getting support from the Bureau or the COCO. And I don't mean to be harsh, but it seems like from what I can tell from Bud, there's a logjam of some sort, and I don't know all of the details, but I would urge the Bureau and the COCO to get together with Bud and try to get his work group moving, because he has work to do and he wants to do it. I think that's all I have. Thanks.
Okay. The Mental Health Subcommittee. Alicia Moreland Capua.
Hi, good evening. So I am the co-chair of the Mental Health Subcommittee Crisis Response Team, and I co-chair that with Dr. Sharon Myron to my right. And as you all know, the settlement agreement, the real centerpiece of it is around the police response to persons with perceived mental illness or in mental health crisis. So that is really the centerpiece of much of the settlement agreement. So the subcommittee is concerning itself with that. Specifically, we have worked very hard to sort of go down parallel tracks and asking ourselves a few questions. What has been done, what needs to be done, and really the space in between what has been done and what needs to be done is really failure or opportunity. And in assessing that, we started out our process together looking at mental health directives for the Portland Police Bureau and taking a lot of time and energy and effort and thought in revising those mental health directives and giving really strong input to the COCO, which came in the form of recommendations to this body. And then as a part of that process, we've also tried to be very laser beam focused in our approach and look at what the settlement agreement called for and work specifically on what's mandated. And so some of the work that we've been doing specifically currently is around understanding a little bit more about the behavioral health unit that the Portland Police Bureau actually had in existence well before the settlement agreement and the DOJ mandate. There was a lot of sort of groundwork done beforehand, but again, this is a part of our process of trying to understand what has already been done in terms of the police trying to respond to persons with perceived mental health crisis or in crisis or with mental illness, and also trying to understand a little bit more about hiring practices, how police officers are hired, and a little bit about the subculture that is Portland Police Bureau. And while doing that, again, working in parallel tracks, doing the work of looking at specific things like the mental health survey, which Dr. Watson referred to earlier in her introductory comments. Our subcommittee has been asked to give specific feedback on that survey that will go out specifically to persons who've had interactions with the police who also were identified as persons with mental health, who were in a mental health crisis or had some sort of mental health diagnosis at the time. So we're in the process currently of looking at that survey and offering some feedback. Our deadline for offering that feedback to Dr. Watson before she distributes it is August 20th. So we've been doing that work as a subcommittee. The other piece is thinking about what's required for us to know in order for us to do our job most efficiently and effectively. So we've looked at specific trainings, but also wanted to understand the trainings that Portland Police Bureau may or may not have had, and if it's required, looking at the crisis intervention training, whether or not what has been done is sufficient. Right, again, the base of our questions are pretty simple. What's been done, and what hasn't been done or what needs to be done, and what should be improved in the process. So we're going through trying to be, again, very strategic, looking at what the settlement agreement calls for around mental health, and some of the mandates for Portland Police Bureau, being thoughtful about that and doing the work in the subcommittee and coming back and making some very thoughtful recommendations. We meet every first Thursday of the month. We invite all of you to please come out to participate. Every first Thursday from 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. We were meeting last Thursday. We met at downtown, but typically we meet at the PCC Climb Center, and all of that information is available on the website. And again, I do encourage you to come. The mental health crisis response piece is the crux of the settlement agreement. Lastly, a few other things that we're doing. The recommendation has been made that the behavioral health unit plus the Behavioral Health Unit Advisory Council members come to present to this larger COAB body so that the public also has a good understanding of what they are, what they do, what their mission is. And then also some other specific trainings coming to a theater near you is also understanding a little bit more about the Unity Behavioral Health Care Project that is a collaborative between OHSU, Kaiser, Adventist, and Legacy. And so Dr. Myron has been gracious enough with her wonderful relationships to have Dr. Chris Ferentinos, who is the director, I believe, of behavioral health for all of Legacy, to join us at our next COAB meeting to educate you, the public, on what that project will look like. And that is in direct response to what the DOJ has sort of mandated, that we have more capacity to provide services for folks with mental health needs, right, that is more readily available. So we will, as a part of our subcommittee, mental health subcommittee, that is something that we have done. And also the behavioral health unit, again, will be coming before you. So again, there's a lot of wonderful things that we are doing and working on. We invite you to come join us, and we invite you to pose any questions that you might have. Thanks.
Thank you. And Bud, we have assumed that as you talk about the charter, if there are things to report from the executive committee, you would incorporate them into this next section.
Okay. All right, so we have 5 minutes. This is a fairly dry document, so I'm going to give you a quick overview of it and see if there's a need for any discussion before we move to vote on that. The purpose of the executive committee is to serve as a guide and aid to the COAB in accomplishing its charges as directed by the settlement agreement. We go into a little detail as to which sections of the settlement agreement there, but I think it's key to keep in mind that we are here to serve the COAB, not the other way around. We are here to act as a point of escalation, a place to get help, and also a place to make sure that we're meeting our requirements under the settlement agreement. Moving into duties, section 2. 2.1, represent the COAB while working with COCL. So basically, we work out the agendas with Kathleen. Serve as the COAB representative consulting with PPB on data collection. You've already seen the data request form. Those data requests come through the executive committee for approval. Coordinate and consult with DOJ and city attorney as needed. So where there is a need to work with the Department of Justice or the city to get a question answered or what have you, we work with them on those things and funnel that back to the full COAB. Act as a point of escalation, again, as Tom just recently did, where we have a subcommittee experiencing an issue. We act as a point of escalation to work with stakeholders, DOJ, city, PPB, to try and get those issues resolved. Ensure that COAB refuse for feedback and comment, all subcommittee reports, et cetera, and outcomes, and then it goes into a list. So basically that's just saying make sure that everything gets put to a vote in the COAB, which is basically saying we follow our bylaws. Provide regular monthly reporting on the COAB and subcommittee progress. That's fairly important. Once we get this approved, we'll be talking about a roll-up reporting format that we want to use with all the subcommittees so that we can then begin reporting into our stakeholders what progress we're making for them. So I think that's a very important point to keep in mind. We'll maintain our own bylaws if necessary. There are none yet, but if we need them, we have the right to do that. And then we go into membership. I think the only two important points to draw out there is we did agree with the Department of Justice that alternates cannot serve on the executive committee and that non-committee members cannot serve on the executive committee. But otherwise, the membership of the executive committee is made up of one full voting COAB member from each of the 5 major stakeholder groups, which are PCOD, Human Rights Commission, Portland City Commissioners, and then the community, and then there were joint representatives from PCOD and HRC. That's why, for instance, after Emmanuel resigned, the person who replaced him is now automatically on the executive committee because that is our one representative from HRC. So that said, I'll turn it over to any questions or discussion.
I'd like to clarify something, but
Go ahead.
2.2, we did, in our setting up of that request for data, we did not require it to go through the executive committee. It can go directly to Tom, Chicago Tom.
Okay, so that might be something that we'll need to modify.
Yeah. The second piece is 3.2. Reads alternates and advisory COAB members. I'm not sure what advisory means in this context.
That would refer to, for instance, police advisors.
Oh, okay. Can we use non-voting?
Right.
Okay. Any other comments, observations, recommendations on this charter? Rochelle?
I would like to have some discussion of the membership of the executive committee. When we first started, we agreed that a fair way to approach that was to have one member, one executive committee member from each of the stakeholders group. And in part, that was because we didn't know each other. And I think the situation is very different now. I think we do know each other, and we have some ideas about strengths and weaknesses. And I personally would like to see us vote on executive committee members from the entire body of 15 members. The other part of that I'm concerned about is that if we leave it the way it is, with Emmanuel's resignation, our newest member, who I'm sure is quite competent, but doesn't know anything about what's happened in the last 8 months, is going to be put in a position, a burdensome position, to have to make decisions on things that she has no history of. So I would like to hear what other people are thinking about this and whether I'm off base or what. Thank you.
V?
Thank you. I also think that it puts an unseemly burden on a newcomer. Also, I think it's important to consider that over the last 6 months, since the inception of the COAB, we have lost 5 very important members. We no longer have a vet, for instance, and I think that's unsettling. And we have the issue of Christy Jameson also being kicked off of the COAB because of those issues, the PCOD. And so the people with lived experience feel rather alone and quite unsupported. And to have people that do know what's going on and people that have exhibited over, this half year that they do care about and are here as advocates for those people with lived experience is critical. And I'd like to hear more information and more perspectives on that, but I'm looking towards a restructuring of the executive committee, frankly.
Bud, you had your hand up.
Just as a point of clarification, where that particular item came from was more from the Department of Justice when we negotiated this charter with them. And they're feeling that the settlement agreement sets up a balance between these stakeholder groups, and that balance must be maintained on the executive committee. I'm not speaking for or against that by saying that, it's just a point of clarification.
Okay, hold on just a minute, V. Anybody else? Back to you, V.
I hope I've made myself clear that the balance on the COAB is woefully tipped. Okay?
We're hearing that.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just when I hear Bud say that the DOJ created this system, that's fine, and I appreciate the spirit of the DOJ doing that. But let's talk about what that means and perhaps even get the DOJ to have a conversation with the General COAB itself, so that way we could be clear about what a balanced representation means
Okay,
in the executive committee.
Okay. Let's be clear about what are we talking about. Balanced representation on the COAB, balanced representation on the executive committee. What we were not prepared to do, I think, tonight was challenge this and go into that big discussion on what does balance mean. So give me your preference for how we proceed with this recommendation for the charter. Tom?
I join in Rochelle's suggestion that, with all due respect to the notion of balance, that I think the executive committee is a crucial, or should be a crucial piece in the success or the failure of the COAB. And I do not think the executive committee to date has been, for a variety of reasons, and I'm not faulting individuals, but has not been as strong and has not, I don't think, provided what is necessary leadership for the COAB. And we all have a lot of work to do. We all have lots of things to do. And I think it's important that the people in the executive committee want to be there, are committed to doing the work, and have the kind of leadership, interest, and abilities that, as Rochelle pointed out, I think we have a feel now for people, and we can make those kinds of decisions. And it's not that it wouldn't be my preference that it would split out and everyone would be representative along the suggested form of the charter, but I don't think it's the best idea for having an executive committee that works as well as I think it's necessary, and I don't think to date it's done as well for us as we would hope for.
And what I'm asking you for at this point in time is to give me some instructions on how you would like to proceed.
Well, I believe I also support what Rochelle has suggested, and for the reasons stated by others. So we can, I'm not sure what we are allowed to do by various bylaws and charters and things, but I think we need to first vote on how many of us feel that there should be a restructuring at this point of the executive committee. And if that motion or vote passes, take the next step to consider how we would proceed to select the executive committee.
Okay. The issue, as I understand it, on the table is the charter itself. So what I'm asking is, what do you want me to do with the charter? It seems to me that what you want me to do with the charter is table it and get some more information, bringing back more information or another perspective. I'm not sure, what you would like to see happen here. But it sounds like this charter is not acceptable at this point to enough of you so that we would want to reconsider it. Is that what I'm hearing? Yes. Okay. That's yes? Yes. Thank you. All right, so that sounds like to me that you are instructing me to make sure that this gets re-examined with your input, or in some ways to have a work group or something that says we think it should look like this. Is that what you're asking for? Rabbi Kahana.
Thank you. I would just like to speak in favor of the outline of this. So I would like to suggest that if we're going to table this, it would not be with the assumption that this should be eliminated. I think the concept of the appointment from these various groups, which is how we arrived here, should be, I think it should be retained. It could perhaps be modified. I don't think that the person who, if a person leaves, that automatically the person takes their place is the one, is responsible for two positions at once. That can be onerous, I understand that. But I think that someone within that group should still be filling that seat. So rather than opening it up for a full election from anyone on the COAB, that it should be within a smaller group. So again, I think I would just like, if this is going to be re-examined, that we not simply assume that it's to be eliminated.
Rochelle, Sharon, and V.
Three of the groups speak one individual, so there is no group to be selecting from. There is only one person that was chosen to be on this committee from the Human Rights Commission, one from the Disability Rights, and then a joint appointment of those two. So 3 people out of the 5 on the executive committee go on automatically. So, you're welcome.
Sharon?
Sorry to be late here, the first part of the conversation, but I really feel like it would be a disservice to the group if we bring on someone new at this time. I think we should pull from the COAB members and allow a 6-month waiting period to go by to where that person can get brought up to speed. And then being brought up to speed, we have other people that we're recruiting to get in the queue because we see how important the work is. And when you're not involved in coming to the meetings, it can just, you will not understand what's going on. So I would make a recommendation that we pull from the members that are already within the group, and then that person coming up, that's being recruited, you know, come on board, be a part of one of the subgroups,
Okay.
and get abreast of.
One of the things that's happening here is we're beginning to try to solve a problem that we're not set to solve tonight. And so I would like to redirect this discussion into where we can get the problem solved. And it's not going to be here tonight. We have some research to do. We need to look some things up. We have an appointment that has been made, and that's the way that it's been laid out. We need to look at that. And we need to look at it as a body. But I don't think tonight, given the agenda, we're going to resolve that. So what I'd like is your permission to start the work that will get you to a place that will resolve the issues here. V and, V.
Did you want to go? Go ahead. I'd like to move to go ahead and put this in the parking lot, the proverbial
Yeah.
10-story parking
Yeah.
lot.
Alicia?
I second that.
Okay. All in favor, please so indicate by saying, what?
Can we just raise our hand?
Okay, do we want to do a roll call again? Just raise your paddles if you say yes. So we got, can you see who's there? Tom, Michelle, Rabbi Kahana, V, everybody who can vote. Okay? We'll be back to you as soon as we can. There is, the next agenda item is regarding the recommendation to establish an accountability subcommittee. And
To put the issue in perspective, the Data Systems Use of Force Compliance Subcommittee originally believed that it would be handling probably more than it was capable of handling, but it would be handling an area of work which is being called accountability. Within that area, there are multiple references to accountability issues in the settlement agreement. And there's a handout that I prepared that lists the Independent Police Review Commission, the Internal Affairs Division, the Employee Information System, discipline as a generic issue, the Police Review Board, and the Citizen Review Committee, and there may be others, but I think that captures most of the various bodies and, at least as an overview, some of the areas where there is work to be done in terms of evaluating directives, in some cases training, and in an overall sense compliance with the settlement agreement in terms of those provisions. As it turned out, our work group determined that we could not, with current membership, staff a work group to do that work. In a clumsy way, I tried to get the subcommittee approved at the last meeting, but it now has gone through the Data Systems subcommittee. It's It's gone through the executive committee, and it's now being brought to the full COAB for a vote to create that subcommittee. In terms of membership, I can say that to date, I know V and I have had some conversation about willingness to work on that subcommittee. And I think both of us have reached out to 2 or 3 different community people who have indicated some interest, depending upon the makeup of the subcommittee and so forth, of doing some work on it. So there's a need for people to do the work. I think there's also the need for the subcommittee to be created.
At some point in time, Tom, I think you had extracted from the settlement agreement the areas, and you put them on a piece of paper. I
I
don't.
thought it was part of the handout. It's a one-page, yeah. Sharon has it. It's a one-page list of the areas and references.
Any discussion on this? This is a proposal to establish a committee, a subcommittee that would be responsible for oversight of the accountability provisions of the settlement agreement. Rochelle?
I think, well, first of all, I support the formation of the subcommittee to look at accountability, because it's even bigger than Tom was saying. It's a whole section in the settlement agreement, section 8, and it's from paragraph 121 all the way through 140. The community has been very concerned about officer accountability, and we really need a committee that is focused just on this topic, as it's really quite large and needs the attention of a separate committee. So I support the formation of a new committee.
Further discussion, observations? Philip?
Hi, this is Philip. I think it's very clear that accountability needs to be involved in its own subcommittee group. I think that's very obvious. I would like to make a motion that we accept the recommendation to establish a subcommittee.
So Philip has made the motion. Do I have a second? We have several seconds. Choose one. Okay. We have a member of the public who would like to also speak to this, and it's Nancy Newell, or Newell.
Thank you for the time and everybody's hard work. This is a very important issue to a lot of people in the city of Portland. There's so much grief and such a lack of accountability on what happens when life is lost and there is no really substantive follow-up to what took place and how it was handled. I think this is one of the best areas where public relations and outreach can accomplish a lot of goals. I'm very concerned that the reaction to a proposal by a very well-meaning citizen was challenged when she offered a book on one of the best studies done in the country on police accountability. That book is now circulating throughout the community to the tune of 100 books, and we are going to continue to advance that. As far as the problem with COAB, I have a very good lawyer who's looking into the problem of you being public officials and you can't accept it because it appears as if it's a gift or some form of lobbying. And this person knows the law inside and out and has won many cases, so I will advise if we get results that say you could all have that book. So I think that the community is very much supportive of what you're doing in many ways that's not visible, and I hope to keep helping. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. So we have a motion on the floor. Do I have a motion and a second? And any more discussion? Yes.
Tom Steenson. Tom, could you say more about the bodies that will be needed to accomplish the work. You've named yourself and V, and you've referred to some community people who might have an interest in supporting this work as well. But could you say more about what that complement of people needs to be in terms of skill set, how you see the accountability committee being staffed? Again, my overarching concern is that we don't have enough bodies to do the work and to do the work effectively.
I can't disagree with you. I'm not sure the existing COAB members, provide enough energy or have enough energy to do that additional work on their own, which is why V and I have begun to reach out to some people in the community. It's also an area that, and I'll be talking about it later, but in 2010, for example, there was a stakeholders group organized by the city, and it dealt with oversight. And oversight, is another word, I think, for accountability in many respects. And so there are people in this community that are not a member of the COAB who have spent a lot of time and energy with other groups over the past 5, 10, 15 years working on accountability and oversight. I think those people can be tapped because they understand a lot of the issues, they understand the history, they understand the impediments to getting things changed. So I think in that respect, those are important people to find and convince to help do the work. In terms of numbers, I don't know. I would assume there's plenty of work for 5 or 6 people to do because it's a lot of area to cover, to understand. And Dennis has talked about it in the quarterly report in some respects, some issues that he's identified that exist, and they need to be fleshed out and looked at. So I think it's going to take some people.
An observation that we currently have in our community an organization, more than one, doing work around accountability, and that's CopWatch. They have been effective. They've provided the leadership, and I'm wondering what it would take to, I'm searching for a word here, to merge or bring CopWatch into the COAB work in a way that validates who they are and what they have meant to our community in terms of the accountability piece, and again, provide COAB with that necessary accountability arm that is that many of us feel is needed. And so I guess as I'm musing out loud, I'm looking at Dan Handelman. What I'm suggesting is not new to him. I think we've had a brief conversation about this issue and how it might work, or if it can't work, why not, and all of that. So if there's an opportunity for him to come forward and speak about it, that would be good, or maybe we reserve that for the public comment time, I don't know. But it just seems to me that CopWatch is the natural organization, existing organization to do this work.
No. Well, let me, okay, yeah, go ahead and comment, go ahead. What do you want to say? You want to invite them? Yeah, okay. Well, that's an invitation that just happened, I think. And I think what we need now is to decide that we want to formalize that and see what we can do after we have some more discussion from the COAB. Okay, let's just go 1, 2, 3.
Okay, I just wanted to say that I also would volunteer to work on such a committee. I have considerable experience
Yes.
in the area of accountability, and I can't formally be on the committee because of the new rule about only being allowed to be on 2 committees, and I'm already on the Data Systems Use of Force Committee and the Mental Health Committee. I've also talked to 2 community members, one who's here with the League of Women Voters and who knows a great deal about accountability, and another woman who is not here who agreed that they would consider participating on this committee. The Copwatch people are always asked to be part of subcommittees. They choose to consult and not necessarily be actual members, so that's a position they have taken in the past, and I think that they would take in the future, and I see Dan's head going like this, so I think that's probably true, but they are asked always. Thank you.
I want to point out that we have moved from discussing the establishment to a committee into the area of actually putting members into the committee without having established the committee.
This is Sharon, and you took the words right out of my mouth. It seems that there is a general consensus that this would be a valuable, a particularly valuable subcommittee to add to our group of subcommittees. And so I would suggest that we go through and vote on whether to form the committee, and then we can have discussion about the membership of that committee, subcommittee.
I have one more request from the public, Brad Taylor, to comment on this issue.
So this is just a general comment, and it's on behalf of Anne Brayfield, who's not able to attend. I am Anne Brayfield, concerned citizen. As a person unable to attend subcommittee meetings, I was pleased to learn today that in the interest of public engagement in the process, that subcommittee meetings, agendas, and minutes will be posted going forward in a timely manner to the COCOL COAB website. And I'm glad to learn that live streaming COAB meetings is being tested tonight and hopefully will be available in the future. The ability to participate in the public comment period in real time would be a welcome addition to live streaming. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brad. I had you signed up for something else, but, okay, so Philip made the motion to establish the committee. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. Do I have a second? Do I have a second? Okay. You have several seconds. Choose one. Okay. All in favor of the establishment of a committee that will be focused on accountability, please raise your paddles. All voting members have voted affirmatively. Thank you. All right. Public comment. We try to do that about 6:15. We're running a little late. General public comment. We have 2 people who want to speak tonight. One is Dan Handelman, and the other is Joyce Harris. Come forward as you choose. And Dan, remember you got 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, CUAB members. Very large table. I'm Dan Handelman with Portland Copwatch. First of all, we had this discussion about the location of the COCL's office, and we have discussions about where you're going to have your general meetings. I'm very concerned about the outreach meetings happening inside a police precinct. The people who are affected by the issues that brought us here do not want to go inside a police precinct. The point of this group is to get us to the place where maybe the community feels comfortable going into the police precinct and when the problems are solved. But the problems aren't solved yet. So, James Chassie ran away from the police, and that's why how he ended up getting beaten up and killed. And there's a lot of people who react that way when they see police officers. So a lot don't want to be inside a police precinct. So I'm hoping you can reconsider that location. And this kind of goes to the recurring theme that we've brought up over and over again, which is that it's not so much the problem that the community doesn't understand what the police are doing in their shoes, that the police don't understand necessarily what the community is doing. And if we want to get the police out of their cars, we should also get them out of the precincts. I'm a little confused about the mental health committee's work that's being submitted to the COCL. I'm not sure if that's being run by the whole COAB or by the public. It's not really clear exactly what it was, so maybe there can be some explanation about that. The appointment of a new person onto the steering committee is going to happen because the only discussion that was happened was tabling the new bylaws for the executive committee. So unless you take a second vote to figure out who should be on there in terms of people who have the background and have gone through all the trainings, that person, no, I don't know you, so I'm not trying, this is nothing personal, is going to be on your steering committee. And I think that should be clear. There's another item that's on your agenda, and I think that there's a possibility that I'm talking about it. It's very confusing because there are 2 or 3 things that are very similar. So I'm just going to say now that in some of the recommendations that are coming forward, it talks about the power to compel testimony, the ability of the Independent Police Review Division to compel officer testimony, and the City Council voted on that last year, and they had to back down after the Police Association kind of came forward and the city attorney agreed that because of an interpretation of who the employer is, as opposed to, like, the city of Portland are the officers' employers, but because the IPR sits in the auditor's office and the police sits under the mayor, they're not in the chain of command, so they can't compel the officers. I think that's the problem that needs to be fixed, and it might have to be a city charter thing, it might have to be a state law thing, so I want to make sure that doesn't get lost. And there's also something in the same document that talks about training deficiencies that are going to be looked at as part of police shootings investigations, and I think it should also mention if the officer violated training as part of the incident that happened. I'm not sure if that's what that meant by training deficiencies, because to me that means that the training itself wasn't good, but I think also if the officer didn't follow training, that should be part of the investigation. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Well, you do better to do it here. If you want to, you get to have public comment on the recommendations after this, but this is the sort of normal place for. Huh? You do? Okay, well, then that's where we'll put you on, okay? Okay.
If you don't mind, would you please speak to the subject of creating an accountability subcommittee and share your thoughts about a role for Cop Watch? What that might look like?
I think Dr. Silver expressed her knowledge of our position about this. Our position has been that we're, especially because of the limitations of the settlement agreement, that we don't want to be a part of the COAB, but we're happy to provide you with information. We've been doing that all along. I hope we've been doing it sufficiently. We have a lot of documents, including one that I thought I had with me, but I don't. The 2000 PIAC work group recommendations, which was what the community had come up with, sitting at the table with police officers, but the majority of the people at that table voted on what the accountability system should look like. And I think that should be included along with the stakeholder report when you're looking at accountability. And so we're happy to provide you whatever information you want. We just can't promise to be at every single meeting or do all the work.
Mm-hmm.
Is that all right?
I appreciate your response. Thank you.
Okay, let's take a 10-minute break and then come back. Before we start business again, the first thing I'd like to do is introduce you to our newest COAB member, Siadam Edmo. Welcome, Siadam. And Alicia has asked for a minute to clarify an issue around the Mental Health Committee.
Sorry, so I think Dan brought this up in his segment, and I had a chance to speak with him at the break, but I also wanted to make sure that all of you were privy to the same information that he was privy to. So the issue was brought up about not being clear about the processes or recommendations that the Mental Health Crisis Response Subcommittee were making. I had made mention of the mental health survey that the COCL has put together that would survey people who had interactions with the police and also had some sort of mental health diagnosis or some crisis response. That we're in the process of sort of working and still gathering information. Once we've gathered that information, a formal recommendation will be brought to this body, but we are not, and I want to have Dr. Watson actually come up and talk a little bit about that process, but I also want to mention that all of our notes, everything that we discuss in our subcommittee meetings, they are promptly posted onto the website. So I would just encourage, you know, to please visit that website with great frequency. So would you like to just clarify further the survey?
For the survey, actually, that's a COCL activity. It's not something under the purview. I mean, it's not a COAB activity. What I originally brought the survey to the committee for was just for some feedback on wording and questions. I don't know that it's necessarily something that requires formal recommendations to be voted on. It was more a way of making sure that we were covering what we needed to gather information. So there was no formal recommendations made by the committee.
That process of discussing this very issue of just going through and even getting feedback from the mental health crisis response subcommittee is made available on the website. So if you come to the subcommittee meeting, you can see for yourself the actual survey. You could have actually had input. All of the public members who were at the subcommittee meeting did have input, and all of that is placed onto the website for your review. So there's great transparency. There's nothing being done sort of under or over. And when we do have formal recommendations, they will be brought properly before the COCL and the COAB for a formal vote. So I just wanted to clarify that, and if there are further questions, we're available to answer after or during the break. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you, Alicia. All right, now we're on to the next agenda item. I'm going to point out that we're running about 10 minutes behind, which means we would appreciate it if you did not repeat yourself as we talk. This is the use of force recommendations. There's a handout that you have, and the presenter is Tom Steenson on behalf of the Use of Force Committee.
The COCL approached me as the chair of the Use of Force Work Group about a month and a half ago, asking us to look at two directives. One we looked at and couldn't see any recommendations that needed to be made, and I won't talk about that. The other one is 1010.10, post-deadly force procedures. It frankly would be probably something the Accountability Subcommittee would look at, but in its absence, we did that. I sort of took the lead on it. I was somewhat familiar with the issues that are raised by that directive, at least as I thought it addressed significant accountability issues that the community has been talking about and complaining about for a very long time. Also, the city, over the past 15 years, has hired consultants, expert police people from two different organizations to come in and offer opinions. And those opinions about the oversight have supported the recommendations that the work group then formulated. Likewise, more specifically, I mentioned earlier in a different context, the city put together with an ordinance in 2010 a stakeholders group that was comprised of a very broad number of groups and individuals in the community. I just want to briefly point some of them out. The Albina Ministerial Alliance, the IPR Citizen Review Committee, Oregon Action, the Portland Police Bureau was included, the Human Rights Commission, the Office of Independent Police Review, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, the National Lawyers Guild, the League of Women Voters, the ACLU of Oregon, CopWatch, the Office of the Commissioner in Charge of Police, and there's several others. It was a very broad, diverse group of the community, and they were convened to look at oversight issues. I think in part it may have had to do with the death of James Chassie. It may have had something to do with the death of Aaron Campbell, but in any event, people were concerned that oversight wasn't being conducted in a way that officers were being held accountable. So that stakeholders group, not everyone voted, but of those who voted, usually 15 to 16 of the members, mostly unanimous. They also passed on recommendations that are similar to the ones that we're now bringing before you. Also, the city auditor supported the recommendations by the stakeholders committee, except insofar as it would require a change in an ordinance or maybe a change in the collective bargaining agreement with the police union. It was recognizing that they couldn't just unilaterally do something. It would take some legislative change within the city and perhaps renegotiation with the police bureau, and I'll get into the specifics. So the point is, what the work group did was really look at the history of what the city's been told for a long time by its own expert police consultants and what the community's been asking for. We marshaled that, looked at the directive, came up with proposed recommendations, took them to the Data System Use of Force Compliance Subcommittee. The subcommittee voted unanimously 5-0 in favor of the recommendations and forward them to the COAB for its consideration tonight. There is a handout that lists the 6 recommendations. I'm going to reverse the order just to sort of get through them. There should be a one-page handout you have. There's a topic called Information to the Media or Public about the Subjects of In-Custody Deaths or Deadly Force. I haven't heard any controversy about these recommendations, but I'll at least read them to make sure everyone's aware what they are. The PBB shall not release information to the media or the public about the criminal history, if there is one, of a subject of an in-custody death or deadly force. The other one in that same category is the PPB should not release to the media or the public the mugshot, if there is one, of a subject of an in-custody death or deadly force. The thinking of Portland CopWatch, and it was then shared by members of the subcommittee, is that there's no need to release that information about the subject of a shooting, whether the person survived or not, or the subject of an in-custody death. That it only taints the picture of the person, dehumanizes the person. It really doesn't add anything to the public or the community's understanding of who this person is who lost his or her life. Maybe later, but not in the beginning. By comparison, the Bureau doesn't release information about the officer and a history of complaints, if there is one. So the Portland CopWatch people and the subcommittee thought it was just information that should not be released. Moving back up the page, again, both through the community and through some of the stakeholders committee meetings and the police experts, we looked at independent outside investigations. There's been a long history of criticism that the Police Bureau investigates itself and that there is the risk of bias, that there's a risk that the investigations are not adequate. And what the issue, I think the subcommittee believes, really ends up addressing is that when you don't have outside investigations of the Police Bureau, the community and the public is distrustful of the results. And I don't think the subcommittee knows whether the results will be different, but they believe that those investigations should be conducted outside. So there's 2 levels of investigations. There's the criminal investigation of officers for potential misconduct. Again, if it's a homicide, typically the homicide investigators for the city and the Police Bureau have been doing that. The recommendation is that should be done by an outside competent law enforcement agency. And whether that would be a county sheriff's office, whether it be the state attorney general's office, it would be done by someone else to ensure that there wasn't some kind of implicit bias or shortcomings by the internal investigation by the homicide investigators. The other outside investigation that the subcommittee felt was important is to have the IPR conduct investigations, particularly of shootings or the use of deadly force and in-custody deaths, and currently they do not do that. And again, I don't know whether the results will be different, but the subcommittee felt that to ensure, at least as much as possible, that there wouldn't be a biased investigation and to contribute to the public's trust of those internal investigations for potential officer misconduct, policy issues, training issues, that it would make more sense to have the IPR do that than currently the Internal Affairs Division of the Portland Police Bureau. The next area is labeled compelled statements to the Independent Police Review Division within 48 hours of incident. There's two issues in here. The first one is eliminate the 48-hour rule. Let me explain what that is. The collective bargaining agreement between the Portland Police Association, the union that represents officers and sergeants, has a provision in there, which the city has agreed to in the negotiations, that requires for any potential investigation leading to any potential discipline, that officers are entitled 48-hour notice before they can be compelled to talk to an investigator. And the sense is that there is the risk that the officer sits down and colludes with other officers and otherwise prepares testimony or figures out what he or she should be saying to investigators to avoid the consequences that might come if there was an early statement being given. And as I think we're all aware, if you're a citizen and you're charged with a crime, or if you're a victim and it's some tragedy, or if you're in a car accident, believe me, the detectives want to talk to you right away because it's important for the investigation to get moving and to find out what people have to say. In this country, the police unions have prevailed in many, many jurisdictions in gaining this delay period. And the feeling again is by the subcommittee and the stakeholders people, and you'll hear from people I think today live in terms of their opinion, is that in order for the community to trust the police, one of the components of that is that they need to be interviewed and forced to give testimony if they're not willing to do it otherwise as part of their job, just like you would if you were in an employment situation and something happened and your employer came to you and said, hey, tell us what happened. It is controversial in terms of the police association. They're going to be testifying, I think, tonight, or offering a position on that. There is evidence that the arguments being used by the police bureau, not the police bureau, but the police union, that because of the trauma associated with the incident, that there's a loss of memory, and therefore officers need time to recover. There's literature and studies that refutes that. I'm not sure what the answer is. I'm not an expert on psychological phenomena. But what I can tell you is the city's own experts and the city's community stakeholder group have all uniformly and consistently recommended elimination of the 48-hour rule. And that's what this community wants. And so that's why the recommendation's here. It's not a recommendation that we anticipated or did anticipate that the police association would support, not at all. But it's something that the community wants and the police experts that the city's consulted with have suggested. So it's clear, this is a negotiating matter. The city can't just do it unilaterally. But what it needs to do is stand up, in our opinion, with the recommendation and tell the union this is a matter that we're going to change. We're just not going to have this 48-hour rule anymore. The other part of the compelled statement is it will take, and I think Dan with Portland Cop Watch suggested this, it will take an amendment to the city charter to give the Independent Police Review Commission the authority to look at officer use of deadly force and in-custody deaths. They currently don't have that authority, but they can simply change the charter, change the configuration for the IPR to give them the authority to do that. There also may be some issue about whether the IPR can compel officer testimony if they are put in that position. I don't know what the legal answer to that is, but I think it's within our purview to make the recommendation that it should happen. If the DOJ thinks it's a good idea and they can't get the city to do it, then that's beyond, I think, what the COAB can do. But again, taking that step to give the IPR the authority to do that and gaining the independence away from the homicide people and away from the Internal Affairs Division is what has been called for years. And so we're moving that recommendation from the subcommittee to the COAB. That's, in a nutshell, what those recommendations are about and why they're being pushed forward. It's not new thinking. It's thinking that the city's own experts have had, and it's thinking that the community's had, and we're simply kind of getting in line and doing our job.
Abel?
Committee, I would just like to speak to the compelled statements.
What I would like to
Issue.
do is for us to handle one at a time. So if we start with compelled statements, let's talk about that a little bit and then
Okay.
go to the next one so that we aren't mixing them all together.
Specifically the 48-hour rule, and Tom and maybe Dan Handelman, you can help me with my memory here. I recall some months ago that the city council heard testimony from one of the consultants. Is it the Park Group? Thank you. I remember them being very explicit about the 48-hour rule being inconsistent with best practices. And I also recall them strongly encouraging that the practice stop. I also recall that it was Commissioner Saltzman who was adamant that the 48-hour rule needed to go. And the mayor said some words that were not as explicit or as specific as Saltzman's, but I'm bringing this up because this is an issue that belongs before the council, the mayor and council, and they need to hear that the subject needs to be a part of the discussion that takes place around the contract. So I can understand that the issue's here before us to talk about and vote on. That's what you're seeking, right? A vote? Yes. Okay. But again, I'm just saying that the council has heard a strong recommendation already from a esteemed consultant, and it's the council that has failed to act thus far. The mayor and council.
Do I have hands? Paul? Philip? Philip?
Thanks, Tom. I do want to focus on eliminating the 48-hour rule. And speaking from the community perspective, that's something that communities wanted for a long time, and most COAB members do agree that this should be eliminated. And I think we need to be really clear, and I think we need to go ahead and vote to eliminate it.
Paul?
So a couple things on compelled testimony. One thing that Tom didn't talk about is Garrity. It's a court case that talks about that as soon as an officer is compelled to give testimony on, say, the basis that if you don't interview or give us the testimony, then you could be fired or disciplined. All of that, the officer says, cannot be used against them in a criminal case. When we talk about compelled testimony, I think we need to be clear on where that occurs in the police bureau, and that occurs in officer-involved shootings and in-custody deaths. If we're talking about a beanbag use or a taser use or pepper spray or something to that effect, or physical injury on use of force, it doesn't happen there. The interview is done immediately. There is not a delay at all. It happens there and the reports are written. So it's a very limited, the compelled. It is, and currently the way that it is moving is an officer-involved shooting occurs, and as you heard from Constantine in the last one, there are 7, 8, 9 layers of review from different places that are not associated with the Portland Police Bureau at all, or under different city elected or county elected officials. And so the review happens, the officer-involved shooting happens, the officer is then given the opportunity at the scene to give a voluntary statement as well as a voluntary walkthrough. They're giving legal counsel, and at that point they have the right to exercise their Fifth Amendment not to self-incriminate. So then what happens currently is there are 2 voluntary recorded statements that officers are given. They're given one to detectives for the criminal interview, and they're given another one to a grand jury. So there's 2 voluntary statements. And now my fear would be that, and something to think about for everybody, is that if we start compelling officers immediately at the scene that they have to talk, where does that criminal side of that potential prosecution go? Tom talked also about the fact that, hey, if you're a victim or a suspect, you're not going to have, they're going to interview you right away. Well, I think that the expectation that the community has of a police officer that's involved in a shooting and the information they give is far different than the information that is expected from a detective to get on a homicide suspect. Somebody else that was involved in shooting somebody. If they're a murder suspect, I need you to admit that you did the murder. Well, an officer, it's far different. We need something that's accurate, concise, correct. We need to know that you're following policy and how what you did fit into that policy. We need to know that you followed what the United States Supreme Court says in Graham versus Connor and the 7 different things that need to be thought about. There's a lot of expectations that are absolutely valid. So I think what the officer has to do, and the expectation officer is far greater, as it should be, I look at one of the reports that Tom submitted, an expert, Samuel Walker, who also was the author of the book on police accountability, and I look at his United States Commission on Civil Rights testimony, supplemental testimony, and he talks about emerging best practices. And I sent an email on everybody on this also, and it says that in cases where an officer is clearly distraught, as in an officer-involved shooting, it is appropriate to delay any questioning. That's the man on accountability. That's what he is saying. And of course, in his studies, it talks about a lot of different things. So again, the compelled testimony, very limited. That occurs after the interview, the voluntary interview that is given to detectives that Internal Affairs is sitting in on. After that is done, then there's a break, and then that's when the compelled testimony happens, and it's regarding policy. So again, I think we need things to think about. I don't know what the answer is, but there's a lot of things to think about here. It's not as easy and as simple as we'd like to think that it is, and there's a lot of things and a lot of information has been sent out. Hopefully you've had a chance to look through some of those things. I look at all the things that Tom has submitted, and really it doesn't say one way or the other, the studies. So a lot to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. Philip, then V.
So, in response to Paul's comment there, if a person in the community is accused of murder and is arrested, they have to explain what happens in the moment. They've got to give their testimony. If they're accused for obstructing justice because they refuse to share that, or they would be charged with obstructing justice if they refuse to give their testimony because they were in crisis or whatever. They would be charged with these different things, but the officers then are in a different situation. So I'm trying to just see where the balance is between those two. And I understand what you're trying to say, and I get the idea behind it, but I don't know, that was all to my comment.
Okay, we have V. Was that your hand?
Yeah. So, I feel really lucky that the PPB wants to work with the community. What I don't understand is, the people that have consistently, or at least there's a pattern in practice, have been harmed. They're not really the focal point. So let me put that away just for a second. And it's true, everybody, in any sort of violent confrontation, everybody suffers. But what I don't understand within this context, within the DOJ framing, why the PPB or the PPA isn't talking more about the community and less about themselves and their interests. If that makes sense. It's an affront.
I think Adrian wanted to add some clarification. How about another piece of equipment there?
This is getting better.
Good evening, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I know there's a couple of new members on the board. I'm Adrienne Brown. I'm one of the DOJ attorneys on this case, and I'm here locally in Portland and work in conjunction with the attorneys that are in Washington, D.C. And I just want to provide just a point of clarification to Officer Myers' comments about Garrity, and just to let you all know sort of where the settlement agreement is at with all these issues. One of the requirements under the settlement agreement under 124 is that within 90 days of the effective date, which has long since passed, but that's part of the deal, the city and PPB were to review the protocols for compelled statements and revise as appropriate so that it complies with law and current professional standards pursuant to Garrity, which is the case that Officer Meyer mentioned. The city was then to submit that revised protocol to DOJ for review and approval, because this is obviously a concern that DOJ had as well. And then once we were to approve it, the officers would be advised of that revised protocol. That has not happened. The submission of a revised protocol has not happened yet. And just a couple of days ago, we sent a letter to the city talking about sort of where we were at with various policies that we're reviewing, because just like you are interested in this policy, DOJ is obviously interested in it as well. And I just wanted to let you know where we're at on that. This was a letter that we also sent to Kathleen and the other counsel in the case, and she can certainly share it with you all. But just to briefly, just to let you know where we're at with reviewing that policy and this issue, is that on June 30th, we sent a letter to the city asking them to actually not implement and not go through the reconciliation of these policies regarding officer accountability, and this one in particular, 10-10-10, because they hadn't met the conditions precedent of the settlement agreement yet, specifically 124 to 127. And we also mentioned, so I do encourage all of you to look at 124 to 127 because it involves more than the compelled statement, it also involves the officers being required to provide an on-scene public safety interview. So there is some information provided to the public. So just take a look at that, but also know that we have asked the city to basically withhold submitting these policies for reconciliation, including 10-10-10, and approval until they have met the conditions precedent of the settlement agreement, one of those being a protocol specifically addressing the Garrity issues. So I just wanted to let you know, and also in our memo, we asked the COCL obviously to take a look at this, and we mentioned, and this is the memo that we just sent to the city on, let's see, it was sent on August 10th, so just earlier this week. We asked them to, or we made sure they knew that we would want to take in consideration the recommendations of the COAB as well. So that's where we're at, and I just wanted to let you know that, just to clarify Officer Meyer's concerns about Garrity, that's something that we're looking at under the settlement agreement as well. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you. Did I have another hand, or, okay, then I'd like to hear from the public. There are people signed up here, and I'm not sure which part of this they might want to comment on, but if there's someone who wants to comment on this particular part, that is compelled statements and the 48-hour rule, please come forth. Oh, and yes, the Portland Police Association is here, and I promised them an entire 6 minutes because there was going to be 2 of you.
Yes, well, thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening. My name is Anil Kari. I'm the lawyer for the Portland Police Association. Thank you for your time and for the extra time to address you on this important issue. As a general proposition, I want to make clear that the recommendations before you from the subcommittee would require collective bargaining. In other words, the PPA would have to come to an agreement with the City of Portland on all of these changes. And I mention that not as a threat, but as a reality that that's what state law requires from us under the Collective Bargaining Act here in Oregon. Excuse me. The recommendations from the subcommittee as it relates to the 48-hour rule, and I want to talk about that specifically because it is the big ticket item, right? The issue is premised, or the recommendation is premised on a fundamental misunderstanding of what the 48-hour rule is and how it works. So what the 48-hour rule is there is in the collective bargaining agreement, and I've got a copy here, so if anybody would like to take a look at it, I'm happy to share. Article 61 of the collective bargaining agreement includes a multi-paged set of due process provisions that provides fairness, equity, and consistency to the disciplinary investigation process, which is, of course, one of the issues in the settlement agreement under the accountability section. These sorts of Bill of Rights are not uncommon in collective bargaining agreements, whether in the private sector, if you're a Teamster trucker, or in the public sector, if you're a firefighter. You see these sorts of due process provisions all the time because what it does is, as I mentioned, lends some consistency and fairness in the investigations process. And if any of you have had any experience with other unions besides police unions, you may be familiar with these sorts of provisions in collective bargaining agreements around the country. One of the provisions is a general notice provision as part of due process. And what the general provision provides is that prior to being compelled to a disciplinary investigation conducted by Internal Affairs, that the officer receives notice 48 hours in advance of the disciplinary investigation, the interview. Why? There's another legal principle out there that provides for, U.S. Supreme Court case law says this, the case is Weingarten, that provides an opportunity for an officer to meet with their union representatives to prepare for the interview. That Weingarten right, by the way, extends to every single collective bargaining employee. That's all the provision does. But the provision only applies to internal affairs disciplinary investigations, okay? And this is going to become important to understand that. Contrary to Mr. Steenson's statement, the 48-hour rule does not apply when a detective is doing a homicide investigation under the purview of the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office. So let's break that down because that's important. The only time the 48-hour waiting period would kick in an officer-involved shooting situation is when a police chief or designee specifically orders a police officer to provide a statement. And what flows from that order? Besides triggering the Bill of Rights in the collective bargaining agreement, what flows from it is immunity. Officer Meyer touched on the federal constitutional standard, which is called use or derivative use immunity. That means that statement cannot be used by a criminal prosecutor, nor could that IA investigator, for instance, be called in to testify before a grand jury. That would be derivative use immunity, and that's prohibited by the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution. Under Oregon's Constitution, remember we've got two constitutions to consider. Under Oregon's Constitution, the standard may even be higher. There's a concept called transactional immunity, which provides that a police officer, after being compelled to testify, after the police chief orders Officer Jones to provide a statement, that officer could not even be prosecuted subsequently. So in other words, Oregon's Constitution may even have a higher standard, and the case is called State versus Soriano. But let's take a step back and consider what's actually happening out there today. The current practice of post-critical incident investigations under Directive 10-10-10. As soon as a police officer discharges his or her weapon in the line of duty, they immediately become the subject of a criminal investigation. Attendant to that status are constitutional rights, no different than any other citizen in this country. The Constitution, the federal Constitution, the Oregon's Constitution doesn't discriminate against police officers or general citizens. The right to counsel, the right to be free from self-incrimination applies equally to a police officer. To Mr. Wolf's comment about, well, you know, a standard citizen who was the subject of a homicide investigation is free to say, no, I'd like to talk to my lawyer first. No, I don't intend on incriminating myself, and I won't answer that question. That right attaches to a police officer post-critical incident. But what's happening is that police officers in Portland are providing voluntary statements to investigators. A homicide detective asks a police officer what happened voluntarily. That police officer voluntarily shows up to a grand jury and provides a detailed account of what happened. In providing that voluntary statement, that police officer is waiving their constitutional right against self-incrimination. They don't have to do that, but they are. So now let's think about this. You have parallel investigations going on.
I need for you to wrap it up. You got your 6 minutes. That was the timer.
Okay. Well, it's an important issue. If I could have the courtesy of another couple of minutes to finish the thought process, that would be, I think, useful for your board.
It's okay with me.
Thank you, I
If it's
appreciate
okay
it.
with the group. Okay.
A criminal investigation and a parallel administrative investigation occurs as soon as an officer discharges his or her weapon. Those two investigations during the pendency of the investigation cannot cross. You can't pollute one side with the other. You get into these immunity issues. On the administrative side, that is where the collective bargaining agreement kicks in. But currently, police officers aren't being compelled to give statements. On the voluntary side, the constitutional, the criminal investigation, the Constitution controls. And these officers are waiving their constitutional rights and providing a statement. Now, under the Constitution, there is no 48-hour rule. You will find nowhere in the United States Constitution or Oregon's Constitution the numbers 4 and 8 together. There's no such thing. Because what happens at that point is an officer is free to confer with counsel, as is the right of any United States citizen. But there's also a lot of dynamics going on in one of these scenes. Investigators, you have Sergeant Hughes here, who works in detectives, can speak firsthand for the amount of information the investigators are having to get a handle on at the scene. And at times, the investigators themselves are not ready to take an immediate statement. They don't know what's happened. They need to start figuring out who's there, who are witnesses, etc. In addition, the officer is going to be experiencing critical incident stress, and Officer Meyer distributed to the subcommittee a number of articles by experts who aren't just police experts, but psychology experts, who have explained the importance, if our goal during this process is to find the truth, to provide sleep cycles, for instance, in the truth-seeking process. So what you have is, for instance, Dr. Alexis Artwall has explained that if part of the process of interviewing an officer who's used deadly force is to get all the factors out that went into the calculus of using deadly force, that you need to account for the psychological impacts of the event on the officer to get that information. And that requires something of a waiting period. And the Constitution doesn't say 48 or 24 or 36 or 72, but officers nevertheless in Portland within 24, 48, 72 hours are providing voluntary statements. Now, if the recommendation from the subcommittee were adopted, what would that mean? That would mean that although the community wants to retain the ability to have their district attorney pursue criminal charges against an officer who is clearly engaged in criminal misconduct, that with a compelled statement, you could never prosecute. You can't use that statement against the officer. So if we're here to balance community interests, one of which is the retaining the right to have a district attorney pursue charges, if so needed, you cannot have compelled statements given the constitutional immunity issues. Look, this is an incredibly complex area of the law. It's a very layered practice, and you're trying to put these two things together and consider what to recommend. And it's an important recommendation. And setting aside the collective bargaining rights of the Portland Police Association, what I would ask you to do is just be thoughtful in your consideration of these recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Okay, you have a question? Yes, fine. My concern is that that if you have something, you've said the same thing several times now. So if there's more stuff, okay. But there's a question here.
Hi. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to communicate this accurately, because this is a confusing, convoluted area of law, and I was a lawyer, and it's still confusing to me. So, it seems like there's a couple of conflicting things that you're saying in support of not getting rid of the 48-hour rule. So are you saying, I was intrigued by your suggestion or comment that if a police officer is involved in an officer-involved shooting, that there's an immediate criminal investigation, they're treated like anyone else, basically, is that a true statement?
Yes.
Okay, so the constitutional, that all applies, so, and I have people saying that's not true, so I don't know, I don't know.
If you're asking my opinion of it, my opinion is, and I've handled these.
This is crucial, yeah.
And the short answer is yes. A police officer who is involved in an officer-involved shooting immediately becomes the subject of a criminal investigation and immediately has all rights under both federal and state constitutions.
Can I just ask a question? Just a follow-up to that, because I read through all of the documents that actually Officer Meyer sent, and in the officer involved shooting guidelines from 2013. It talks about specific, I just want to give a specific example, is that the gun is immediately taken away from the officer if it was involved in the shooting, but then they are given the option to get another gun
Right.
in the process during that investigation because it's considered a vulnerable time. So I guess this is an issue of, there's a spirit of the law, which we can respect and appreciate. Then there are human rights and civil rights, and sometimes the law does not necessarily complement that. So while the words are flowery, we're understanding there are a lot of confusing and conflicting things that you're saying. So to make a statement and to make it factual, to say that a police officer who's involved in a shooting and is in a criminal investigation is treated just like every other citizen, I'm not sure I agree with that logic.
Right,
Or that rationale, so.
And where, sorry, just to follow on that, like where you were saying that, you kind of had me with that they're treating like any other person who's accused of a crime, but then you say, but they're entitled to, they have to have the right sleep cycle and the right, all of this stuff. And my impression, I mean, I just watched Law and Order, I don't know, but I'm sorry, but
Okay.
and I know, oh, that's TV, but it's my understanding that people who are accused of crimes are not given not given sleep cycles before they are interrogated, or whatever else it is. So I feel like there are contradictions, and I feel they can be reconciled, but I'm not sure I have the information right now to make that reconciliation. So
I
it
see.
seems like
Do-
critical
wait,
incident
if-
stress
Hold
applies to
on.
anyone.
V and then Rochelle, please. Okay.
Could I
Alicia?
address the questions as they come at me? Otherwise, I'm going to lose track of them.
What was the question?
Well, there were two comments, and
I heard the comments, but I didn't hear a
Okay.
question for you. Alicia and then Rochelle.
I
And then
would like to hear from other people in the community, not just one person.
Yeah, we've got a list here of people, which is why I've asked them to limit their presentation. But if you have questions for him, I think that
No,
you
I
should.
just want to make another comment, because you keep talking about sleep cycles, and people are probably like, what are they talking about? Is anybody like, what are they talking about? Raise your hand. Okay, so if you read through the article, it talks about what we call rapid eye movement sleep, or REM sleep, right? And when we get good sleep and REM sleep, it consolidates memory. It helps us to memorize things. So if you're studying for an exam and you go to sleep on it, which you should wake up and whatever you learn should be consolidated, theoretically. But I want to look at this issue of trauma in the case of anybody being in a traumatizing situation, and why that might be a problematic sort of, even reading through the literature, you're right, there is not one solid sort of explanation as to what is true, but let's just use our common sense here. If you are in a traumatic situation, whether you're the shooter or the victim, right? Whether it's vicarious trauma, whether you're the family member of someone who was killed or the family member of the officer who was involved in the shooting, in a traumatic situation, none of us are in the thinking part of our brain, which is the cortical aspect. We're in the bottom part of our brain, which is that emotional sort of responsive part of our brain. And so you're in survival mode, and that does impact your sleep, but that can impact your sleep for weeks and months out. So to make the argument that getting good rest in the context of, I just take issue, and I try not to get too technical in these meetings, but there are scientists among us in the room who do understand the brain and how it works. And I'm not sure that I'm really convinced that that is an appropriate argument to make in the context of this 48-hour rule, or giving people time to rest for the purpose of consolidation of memory. Because if you're a wreck, again, and you're in that bottom part of your brain, you're not sleeping, and that could be a cycle. If you're in acute stress phase, then that turns into a post-traumatic stress phase. That could be a long-term protracted process. So I'm not sure I'm necessarily convinced from a neurobiological or physiological standpoint that that is an accurate assessment. So that, I'm just responding to you because you're the lawyer, but you're talking to doctors, and so I just wanted to, which is fine, but I also want to make sure if we're going to talk, we need to talk factually.
Well, and
Can I
because
hear from you, Rochelle? Could I hear from, and then Rabbi Kahana?
Rochelle, I think you're first. I actually have a question. And I wanted to make sure, because I wanted to understand the legal aspects of what you said. So, am I understanding correctly on the issue of pollution that there is your assertion that there is an immediate criminal investigation in which depositions are given at some level, that the officer gives report as any other person would? There is a secondary internal investigation which is separated by 48 hours so that the two don't overlap. Is that what I heard you say?
Partially. So the concept of making sure that those two statements stay away from each other is correct. What's happening, though, in the interest of expediting the investigation process, Portland officers, with the PPA's consent, have agreed to a process where detectives will do their interview, and immediately thereafter, the internal affairs investigators will pick it up and question them about the policy violations.
So there is not a 48-hour holding process.
Because that interview, that consolidated interview, is being conducted primarily by the detectives, the 48-hour rule, if you will, is not dictating when that interview takes place.
Thank you.
And attendant to that back-to-back interview, the police officers are saying, we understand the internal affairs investigators are here and will not claim immunity.
But that's voluntary?
Yes.
So the officer can assert his right, not her right, not to have, to keep those two separate and to give separate testimony 48 hours later.
Correct. But the officer is waiving that and saying, I'm happy to give that statement together so that you guys being the detectives and internal affairs, can get information expeditiously.
I'm asking about the rights. So the right is retained by the officer to not give that internal investigation testimony immediately.
Right.
Is that correct?
I'm not quite understanding your question.
The question is, does the officer have the right to refuse to give an immediate response to an investigator when there's been a gunfire?
That's.
Well, that's what
I'm not sure that was the rabbi's question.
That
but-
was my question.
Well, sure. The officer can say, no, I'm not going to give you a statement right now because I'm the subject of a homicide.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, V.
I understand, you're sorry, thanks. I understand you're from the PPA, and I totally respect that. But sort of putting your lawyer suit aside and just taking it from the human perspective, why do you think the community wants the 48-hour rule gone?
I don't think the community understands the 48-hour rule.
You don't?
No, and that's what was hoping to try to help flesh out. What I think the community wants is a clear explanation by the officer as to what's happened. And I think the community wants the ability to say, your conduct is criminal and that a district attorney is going to pursue charges. And I think the community wants answers.
So the community wants answers,
and
right?
officers are providing that information
And
to
that'll
the
be
community.
more of a pathway towards a sense of justice or procedural justice or that kind of thing. I'm just trying to get down, because I spent like 8 minutes listening to lawyers speak, and while interesting, a little bit convoluted and over my head. And I think it's not important, it's critical that community members begin to feel as though the PPA actually cares about them, in a substantive way, beyond legalities, and more to, as Dr. Capua was saying, more on the justice end. So I thank you for coming.
Let's hear from the community. Let's hear from some of the people. Okay?
One last question that I have is, if the 48-hour rule is such a small thing that's waived anyway because the officers want to, want to just be efficient, et cetera, then why is it a big deal to get rid of it?
Because the 48-hour rule applies to every single form of disciplinary investigation. If an officer is late to work and their chief wants to know, how come you've been late to work?
They get to wait 48 hours and tell them? I mean, that seems, sorry.
Now, to be fair, the collective bargaining agreements, if you pick up, I can pick up the Hillsborough Firefighters Association collective bargaining agreement, and they have a similar provision.
So you're saying this would just be carving out an exception to all the other things that you're required to do? So it's not technically because it's an officer-involved shooting per se, but it's the overarching collective bargaining contract that
Correct.
you get this for all.
What I'm saying is if the police chief orders through the internal affairs process that an officer give an immediate compelled statement at the scene of a shooting, the contract applies. If the police chief does not compel the officer, the Constitution applies, and this document is not the one that we're looking at in determining rights.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's hear from Reverend Haynes.
To the esteemed lawyer, for the Portland Police Association, I hope that the COAB committee would give the community also 15 minutes of presentation for this. To have a balance in between of what's happening. I think that I don't know whether the esteemed lawyer of the association can quite speak for the community as the many other community partners that are here. But this is not a new issue. We've been dealing with this issue for over 11 years. We've been researching other models across the nation. You go to New York, you go to Dallas, Texas, you go to anywhere else, there are different hours, different in different contracts. There's no one set type of model that exists that. And that's one of the things that OIR, the research consultant that has come back not just 1 year, but come back for 7 straight years to say the same thing, that the city needs to renegotiate the 48-hour rule. And so this particular rule is offensive to the community. It's offensive in particular in deadly force cases and excessive case. Now, we have before you case study. Let's start with the Kendra James case, which set this into motion. It took the officers that killed Kendra James not 48 hours, but 5 days to 7 days to do an interview with the detectives. Now, I ask you, how many citizens, tax-paying people in this community are given that type of balance in terms of taking the time to do an interview with detective? Not only that, it was reported by both participants and the morning news that the same officers that killed Kendra James met up at Applebee restaurant and got their stories together. And that's why the community say cover up. If there is no integrity into the system of investigation, you begin to destroy the system of law and order in our country. If the community does not believe that in the integrity of the system, that officers can get together openly in public at an Applebee restaurant and get their stories together and refine their stories and then tell the same story to the detectives. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about getting to the issue of the integrity of the investigation. And what destroys the trust of the people and destroys the trust of the citizens in this community and throughout this nation is when investigations do not have integrity. And the failure of integrity will create rebellion in our nation. The Kendra James case created a situation that we, the MA Coalition, begin to promote the issue that we need to renegotiate the issue of the 48-hour rule. Case law, look at the cases. Look at the cases. Look at the time limit of what was given officers. It's a double standard. It's a double standard for the citizens who are tax-paying, who go through trauma, go through psychological situation, and the police officers who are given privilege. That's what it is. It is privilege. It is blue privilege that is given to the officers, and they do not have to follow the same standard of the citizens of this country. And the Constitution is that, the state constitution is that, but there's a leadway that is given to the officers in our community. And the people are saying in one voice, this cannot be. This will destroy the system of law and order. That's why we have rebellions going across the whole nation today. The issue of integrity, the issue of justice, the double standard that exists, and so we need to look at this 48 hours. It creates mistrust between the Portland Police Bureau and members of the community who want a fair system, a just system, an equal system. The 48-hour rule runs counter to the major studies that have been done across America, demonstrating the need for independent, fair, and just investigations of deadly force and assisted force in our system. And I ask you today, would you, sitting behind that desk, have the same privilege as an officer on the police force? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend Haynes. More voices from the community. I have Dan Handelman, Debbie, and I can't read the last name.
Good evening again. I'm still Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch. You know, I heard this exact same speech from the Portland Police Association 15 years ago when we were talking about creating the IPR. And it never ceases to amaze me that we're hearing the lawyer for the Police Association saying, do you, the community, really want to give up the ability to prosecute police officers in a court of law? Because they know full well that there's only been one prosecution ever in this city, and the officer who was going to be prosecuted unfortunately committed suicide on Memorial Day this year. Nationwide, the New Washington Post found that in 10 years, only 54 cases had charges brought against the officers, and there were only 11 convictions. So it's not really, it's kind of a really false argument, straw man argument to say, why would you give up your right to prosecute officers? Because it's not happening. What we want to see is the officers held accountable. So the way to do that is compile their statements right away and have them say something. If something looks like the officer dropped the gun right there, like we have video, like they did in North Carolina, if it's so horrible that they recognize that, they can forego doing the compelled statement and they can start a criminal investigation. But I think that the history of this city and this county shows us that we can't count on the DA to prosecute. We don't have a special prosecutor for police shootings. We've been calling, that's another thing the AMA Coalition is calling for. We don't have that. We are not opposed to collective bargaining. We think it's very important for people to have rights when they're on their job. We think that this is a policy issue for the community, and it's not something that should be set in collective bargaining. We urge you to tell the city council to pull that 48-hour provision out. I also wonder why it would take 2 sleep cycles to explain why a person was late to work. And the comparison to citizens is that most citizens don't know their rights. They don't get the rights automatically invoked for them to speak to a lawyer before they talk to the police. So if they make a statement right after a traumatic incident where there was a shooting or they were the subject or the shooter, they're not discounted what they said. Nobody says you didn't sleep for 48 hours before you gave that testimony, so we're going to throw it out. They take your word for it, whatever it is. So I think that this is all very arbitrary. You should also know that Dr. Alexis Artwald, that was cited by Mr. Carrier, was the psychologist for the Portland Police Bureau, so it's not like she's disconnected from police. Another so-called expert that works on this issue and insists that 48 hours are necessary is Dr. Lewinsky from Minnesota, and the New York Times did a front page article about him just a couple of weeks ago, showing how his research is not sound research and it's widely discredited, and that he's mostly in the business to make money and explain why police officers do what they do instead of getting to the truth of the matter. So I want to give you all those things to think about as you make this vote. I also just want to point out that in my earlier testimony, I forgot to mention that when the new quarterly report came out, I went line by line through it to see what had been changed. And Dr. Rosenbaum and I very strongly disagree about the use of names in the report, and I really think it harms those reports to not be naming the names of the people who are being talked to. Unless there's some person asks for anonymity, I'm really hoping that you will put names in the reports. Thank you very much.
Debbie Iona?
Hi, I'm Debbie Iona, representing the League of Women Voters of Portland. The League has consistently monitored the city's police accountability system since the 1980s. We support the recommendations forwarded by the Data Systems Use of Force Compliance Subcommittee and would like to highlight 2 of them. The Police Assessment Resource Center, PARC, the independent consultants hired by the city to review shootings and deaths in custody, raised concerns in its 2006 report about relying on the East County Major Crimes Task Force in investigating officer-involved shootings and in-custody deaths. PARC pointed to their lack of familiarity with Bureau policies, training, and investigative protocols. More recently, the OIR group recommended in its 2014 report on shootings and deaths in custody that the Bureau consider whether it is beneficial to have the East County team involved in shooting investigations. When both of the independent experts hired to review these cases agree that there is a problem over nearly 10 years, the city should heed their advice and take a different approach, as is being recommended by the subcommittee. And then on the 48-hour rule, it's another issue first raised by PARC a number of years ago and echoed by OIR in its more recent reports. The independent experts agree that the city should end the 48-hour rule so that full and contemporaneous accounts of these incidents can take place. And I think, when you hire these people who are nationwide experts and that this issue comes up over and over again in these reports, and they explain in detail why they have concerns based on actual cases that have happened, that we should be listening to their advice. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call your attention to 1 second. Let me call your attention to the time. This means I'm going to reorder the agenda and move the September 14th report up. And if we have time after that, we'll discuss the training. Add a hand down here.
So I wanted to just kind of walk the COAB through kind of our current process up in detectives to make sure that, and I know Neil came down and kind of explained some of that, but just to kind of clarify some things So when an officer-involved shooting occurs, detectives obviously respond, IPR actually comes out, the district attorney's office comes out, our union representation folks come out, lawyers. Witnesses to that officer-involved shooting by policy actually give us a statement that day. And I don't know if you guys knew that or not, unless there's some reason they can't, they're incapacitated or something, but they give us a statement that day and are able to give us some walkthrough stuff to be able to start and process the scene and start the investigation. The 48-hour rule, like Neil was talking about, is separate because of the internal discipline process. So that's usually how it works right now is the officer comes in roughly 48 hours later and gives a voluntary statement. If we were to compel something on scene out there, we would lose that voluntary statement. And that's a big concern because we want to, if there is something going on here, we want the investigation to be thorough. If it's revealing that something went wrong, then the prosecutory side can take over and actually move forward with that. And we've had that happen, and we've actually had that happen. Dan Handelman mentioned it on an officer-involved case here just a while ago. Actually, that officer did give a voluntary statement, and the prosecution still moved forward with it to determine that that officer did have some accountability issues there. As that interview takes place, detectives sit in with the person and they interview that person extensively. Internal Affairs is also in the room, and when the detectives are finished with their questioning and interviewing, there's a break in the action where the investigators leave the room and Internal Affairs takes over, and that's where they compel their portion of their investigation, of their internal investigation. Something to be known, you know, and it's kind of talking about, I think the Reverend hit on, and I know Tom Steenson hit on collaborating with other officers at a scene. One of the things that is done right away on an officer-involved scene is witness officers and involved officers are separated immediately so that we can prevent just that from happening. In the course of the investigation that night, after witness officers have been interviewed, after dealing with the involved officer to the point that we can that evening, they're all giving communication restriction orders, prohibiting them from talking to each other about the event. Typically, those communication restriction orders don't get removed until after the grand jury process, so that the investigation will not be tainted. They can also be extended for internal reasons. If IA would like to extend the communication restriction order because they feel like there's more on their part to be done, they have the option of being able to do that. As the investigation progresses, it goes through several stages, as Paul was talking about, of review to be looked at: command findings, IPR, CRC, training division, IA. And as that process works, that's how we thoroughly investigate one of these. But there's lots of steps that take place in the process of all of that. But when you're talking about the 48-hour rule, it's not necessarily the criminal side, just like Neil was saying. You're talking about a collective bargaining issue and an internal discipline issue, and they're two separate things. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys kind of understood that. They're two very separate things. But we want to keep the voluntary process going. I know Philip mentioned that citizens have, they're getting looked at differently. Well, that's because Miranda becomes involved, Miranda warnings, and they can exercise their right not to talk and retain a lawyer and invoke their opportunity to talk or wanting to talk. If you do that to an officer, you won't ever get a voluntary statement. You won't ever get a statement out of the officer. Because as any lawyer would tell you, and the advice they would give you would be, no, you're not going to make that statement, you're not going to talk. But right now we have a process in place with the agreement of the union, with the agreement of the police bureau, of the detective division, of all these different groups, that we're getting a voluntary statement which explains the officer's actions. He or she can come in and explain why they did what they did. And that's valuable information for a thorough investigation.
Okay. Thank you. V? You had your paddle up?
Michelle, for that thank you, Michelle, for that clarification. Are we going to be talking about the letter to Judge Simons?
Yes, as soon as we can get through this part here.
Oh, are we almost done?
I hope so.
Okay, good, because I'm getting impatient.
Okay. What we have here are essentially 4 recommendations, as I understand it. Am I right, Tom?
Separate ones in 4 categories.
Okay. What I need to know is if you want to handle them independently or as a group. My suggestion would be is that you handle them independently. Okay? So the first one that you went over was, would you please read the recommendation on the media?
Well, if I intervene here, I've heard no objection at any time before the work group, before the subcommittee, or today to any of the 5 recommendations that do not include the 48-hour rule. So if you're going to separate something, I would suggest we vote on those 5 recommendations and then vote on the 48-hour rule.
Okay.
I don't think it's necessary to do that, but that's what I would.
V?
I'd like to make a motion to pass the whole lot of them from the DSUFCS.
All right. Any discussion on that?
I feel very strongly that we should separate them out. I'm sorry. But I think there are different issues that are brought to bear with each of those different recommendations. And I don't feel that, I feel there's more discussion to be had. I don't think we can necessarily come to a conclusion tonight, but if we are going to, I don't feel that that I could, in good conscience, feeling like I have the right information, vote on all of these. And I think there's significant. Anyway, I'll stop with that.
Okay. Philip?
No one has made a recommendation or anything against anything, meaning that seems that we have come to a similar understanding here. So guess I'm just trying to understand your perspective.
Philip?
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that. I guess I think there's a feeling out there, and when I think, my gut reaction is I hear this, oh my gosh, there's a 48-hour rule and the police get to go to sleep in their beds and think over and collude and decide what they're going to say, in 48 hours in this investigation, and other people don't have that right, so why should this happen? But what I'm hearing and what I think the law is saying is something quite different, and I don't want us to miss that and misinterpret it. It sounds to me like there are 2 separate things, and I could be totally wrong, but that there is the criminal investigation, and if there is any criminal activity, it sounds like the officer is in fact interviewed at the scene. They can exercise their rights to not speak or do whatever. But if there are faults with that aspect of things, the criminal side, then we should address that as the COAB and investigate that process and ensure that the integrity of that procedure in that situation. But it sounds like that is very different from the administrative side, and I don't get into collective bargaining agreement. I understand the value of, whatever the time is for whatever the collective bargaining agreement, and for that administrative side, that would be a separate consideration for the COAB to have. But I think we're lumping 2 things together, and I disagree that we should just get rid of say, okay, we're going to say get rid of the 48-hour rule because I don't think we're approaching it the right way, and I think
Okay.
it's important. we
Rabbi
do it.
Kahana, then Bud,
I concur.
oh, then Rochelle. Yeah.
I
okay.
concur. We've spent a lot of
Rochelle.
time on this question of 48 hours and no amount of time on any of these other questions, and I think I'm completely unprepared to comment on anything else that's here.
Rochelle, then Sharon.
I think maybe we get mixed up because people use words differently, like the word interview. So you're told that the officer is interviewed by the detectives, and you assume that that's a nice long interview and they can ask as many questions as they want until they get whatever they want. But all the officer has to do is give a voluntary statement. And that statement can be as short as one sentence. Right,
It
and that
can do that.
officer has the same constitutional rights as anybody in this room.
Right.
And what they have here are additional rights that are unnecessary.
It's just for their job, that's just related to their,
Related to their job
Job and their
because it's
function.
something that the union has accomplished for them. The city vets police experts, pays them big bucks to oversee the officer-involved shootings. Starting in 2003, PARC, the Police Assessment Resource Center, has said clearly, get rid of the 48 hours. They said it a second time, they said it a third time. Then the city started working with OIR. OIR has said that twice now. We're paying experts, not just us, to say this. Then we have the community. The community met as stakeholders from every group there was that was interested in oversight. They all said, get rid of the 48 hours. You have an article as in July of 2015 by an expert says get rid of the 48 hours. The Oregonian said we should get rid of the 48 hours, and it's because the city is so wimpy and they cave into the PPA that we haven't gotten rid of the 48 hours. I don't know how much more we have to discuss about this. We discussed it, we discussed it, we discussed it. There is nothing really more to say, unless you want to go home and read these articles, which I would have hoped you would have read before.
Okay. Sharon, Jimmy, no, Sharon, Bud, Jimmy, Philip.
Just a really quick comment. So, as it relates to the recommendations, they were sent out to the whole COAB, correct? And I just feel like when we come to these meetings at large, as though the rest of the committee members that are not on the subcommittee are not reviewing the information so that they can come prepared to even ask questions, and then we're constantly rehashing this over at, tabling it, and I just don't think that we're being productive in our work. And I would like to make sure that when the subcommittees do the work in the subcommittee and we post all of our meetings and we send out the information, that it should be reviewed by all of the COAB and taken seriously so that we can continue to be productive for the voice of the public.
I would agree, but I would also say that we didn't get them out till yesterday. So, was
provided here
provided
that
today.
was not
Yeah.
part of what was sent
Right.
out. So I do take it seriously, and I do read through things. So.
We are supposed to end at 8:30. I need for you to make a decision. Are we going to try to continue this conversation tonight? Are we going to vote on some of these recommendations and send them forward? Are we what is it that is your preference at this point in time? My recommendation is that you vote on the one that you've discussed the most tonight. Okay. I didn't. the motion, I heard
There was a motion on the table.
for the
and it was
whole,
sec-
yeah, okay.
Vote on all of them as somebody moved.
Okay. So that's, okay. The motion is to vote on all of the recommendations, up or down, as a slate. Is that am I right?
Yes.
Okay. Then let's call for the question. Let's-
This is a vote to say, do we vote on this altogether or to break them up? Not a vote up or down on the substance.
The
Is that
motion
correct?
I heard was to vote them up or down on the substance.
I didn't hear that motion.
The motion on the table was to
On the
approve
whole.
them en masse.
On the whole, right?
On the whole. And so,
There's
Thank
a
you.
motion and a second to approve them as one, okay? Are we ready to vote? All in favor of approving all recommendations, please indicate by raising your paddles. So we have Tom, Michelle, V, Alicia, Bud, Jim, Jimmy, Abel, Siadam, Philip, Sharon, Catherine. Did you vote? And, okay. Abstentions? Noes? We have 2 noes. Yes. Sharon, yeah. Okay. The motion passes. The recommendations are to be forwarded. Okay. I would like your indulgence, please, to take care of a piece of business that needs to be taken care of tonight. And that is the selection of the person who will go before the judge on the 14th and represent the COAB.
Can it only be one person, or is it possible we can send 2 people?
I'm looking for the, Adrian. Yeah. I had it all marked out.
And again, Adrienne Brown. The way the order reads is that the city, orders the United States, the city, a voting member of the Community Oversight Advisory Board chosen by the COAB, a group created under the settlement agreement, and the COCOL, all to appear before the court at the annual status conference to discuss the progress being made toward achieving substantial compliance with all provisions of the settlement agreement and any obstacles or impediments towards that end to respond to the court's questions on these issues. So it is one voting member of the Community Oversight Advisory Board as ordered by Judge Simon. I do want to just make one point of clarification, actually 2 if you'll indulge me. One is we have asked the court via the courtroom deputy counsel. I'll send an email asking her if she could provide us some more information about how much time the court anticipates this hearing to last, and we asked her if the court could provide some more information about how much time each of the representatives, because in addition to the United States, the city, a COAB member, the COCOL, there will also be representatives from the AMA to present information on the collaborative agreement, which we have as a side agreement to this, and the PPA to provide information on the status of the memorandum of agreement we have with them, which is also a separate side agreement. So there's a lot of people providing information at this hearing, so we've asked the court at the request of the COCOL and at the request of the other parties to find out what the court envisions as far as how much time each person will get. But it is one member. And then the other second point of clarification is it was brought to our attention tonight that September 14th is a very important Jewish holiday. And I can tell you that, one, that Judge Simon set this September 14th date a long time ago when he initially entered his previous order before we went into mediation and now have this amended order. However, we definitely respect that concern, and all counsel represented by each of the parties was here tonight, and we discussed amongst ourselves, and we are happy to, one, confer with each other and suggest additional dates to Judge Simon. However, it is Judge Simon's decision at the end of the day. We can't guarantee that there will be a change, but we are happy to make that request to accommodate this concern. So we will have more information on that later.
Okay, thank you. Yes, V.
I'd like to propose that Senator Avell Gordley and Tom Steenson be stewards of the letter therein, gathering data from each general COAB member, and then amongst themselves, now that we have this new information, or at least I do, which one would want to present that to Federal Judge Michael Simons?
Discussion? Do you understand what, Rabbi Kahana?
I'm just curious, and perhaps you can be enlightened, why those steps are necessary. Why not just simply appoint someone for that position?
Which steps? I mean, which steps?
Why we need to have two people, just what you described. I don't know if anybody else has.
Three heads are always better than one. I thought that it would better represent the community that has been historically victimized. And
One of
Tom-
the suggestions from the local team was to have the local team, local cocal, yeah, that's us, was to have the chair for the executive committee play that role. So that's another idea. Okay. Yeah, we have a motion on the floor now, so, and we have a second for it, so we have to deal with that motion. Okay.
Comment. So I think did I hear Bee say that she recommended that Abel and Tom collected information from the COAB at large, and then they decided on between them who would present that? Is that what you said, Bee?
Yeah, that's what you said, yeah.
That's correct, Sharon.
Okay.
And that's what you seconded.
Yes.
And so now we need to address the motion on the floor. Rabbi Kahana?
So we can't put a second motion on the floor
Not
until
till
we
we'll
vote on
deal
this
with the
motion,
first
but
one.
I just want to, point of information, will recommend that the chair of the executive committee be appointed.
Okay, let's deal with the first motion. Okay. Lee's motion was to have Abel and Tom, if they consent, to work together to gather information, and then between the two of them decide who would be the representative at the hearing on the 14th. Any more discussion? Okay, all in favor? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wait, you've got V, Rochelle, Tom, Sharon, Catherine. Okay. See. All opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What do we got? 3, 5, 6. Philip, did you? He's abstaining. Okay. So we got Sharon, Rabbi, Kahana, Alicia. Okay. Seattle. Jimmy. How many? Huh? Jimmy voted?
You voted yes.
He voted. Did you vote yes or no, Jimmy? No. Voted no. That's what I thought. Okay. So what do we got? Do it again. All in favor? I'm sorry. All in favor of the motion that V made. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There is a tie. Okay. And you abstained. You're abstaining, is that correct, Philip? Any other well, I think that takes care of everybody, doesn't it? So who breaks the tie?
Well, so a point of clarification, you may not have to do the tiebreaker, although I believe the chair is
Yeah.
the tiebreaker in
Yeah.
this situation, which you could, but this, not to put a damper on things, but I believe if the motion passed, you would not be in compliance with Judge Simon's order because it requires the COAB to choose the voting member. So it's maybe a technical point, but what you're doing is delegating the choice of the member to Mr. Steenson and Senator Gordley. And so it's a hyper-technical point, but to the extent that you want to take that into consideration in perhaps tabling this motion and maybe moving on to the second, I just...
Hold on.
It may be a moot point. I would have stepped up earlier, but I just wanted to let you all... Well, yes.
Okay.
The United
Go ahead.
States agrees that, that the judge's order, okay, this isn't our decision, the judge's order is that a voting member of the Community Oversight Advisory Board chosen by the COAB, and under the settlement agreement, the COAB are the voting members and the advisory members, but obviously the voting members make up the COAB, so the voting
Right.
members must decide who the person is. So I agree that it's not, that Judge Simon's order is not for it to be delegated by a subcommittee, which could be as little as 2 people, but it has to be voted on by the whole COAB.
Okay, so that negates the whole... Okay, ask the question.
So as far as the executive committee, we have a vice chair, we haven't voted in a chair for
Yeah.
the executive committee, my understanding.
You have a, okay. Philip, did you want to say something? And then you have an acting chair, yeah.
Yeah, I propose to go ahead and table that vote for the next meeting.
We don't have that, we need to be prepared before then.
I like to withdraw the motion.
You don't have to.
Okay,
I don't have to.
okay, thank you.
Nominate. No, it's just not a valid. Okay. I nominate Bud as the chair of the executive, acting chair, whatever, of the executive committee to represent us in front of Judge Simon.
Second.
Okay, let's try it again. There is a proposal on the floor nominating Bud to represent us at the hearing with Judge Simon whenever that happens. All in favor, please raise your paddles. Is that everybody? No, it's almost everybody.
Yeah, that passes.
Passes. But she needs, hold them up, she needs to get the count. It's Tom, Rochelle, it's Sharon, it's Rabbi, it's V, it's Elise, no, well, I thought, Alicia. Okay, all right, got them? Okay. You're it, Bud. Okay. The piece, yes. I thought that's what we did. Okay. I'll do better. It didn't go that way. You're right. I would agree with you, and I changed that roll call vote because it was taking too long, or it seemed to be taking too long, and because we're now like over time. Each meeting is a challenge, and we've been trying to trim things back to make sure things fit, and we'll try to do better. Thank you. V?
Yeah, oh, goodness sakes. Well, apparently Bud is the chair now, or the acting chair?
He is the acting chair.
Okay, so now, the point about the letter to the judge, we know that Bud's gonna present it, but who's writing the letter?
Well, it'll be a collaborative effort.
Okay, that's the
yes,
implicit
yeah.
assumption that's going on then. Okay, I just want to be
No,
clear.
I was going to say it. I think it's written into the handouts that you have, that we would work to form a work group that would work with him to develop a presentation.
Okay, so that recommendation that we received last night at 6 p.m. to consider from you, that email, is that what you're referring to, more or less?
I don't know what time you got it, but. it
Okay,
should-
so yesterday sometime?
Yeah, yesterday.
Okay, that
Yeah.
you recommended. Okay, thank you very much.
Can you guys hear me? Just for the record, on my behalf, there has been a lot of information that has been given to us tonight. Like for myself, I know that my head is over here hurting. So some of these things to vote and to really understand, if I have not been, I'm 38 years old, and I have not been sitting in this room and doing this work for 15 years. So I want to give the best judgment that I can think about while I'm listening to what it is that I'm hearing and what it is that I understand. So there has been some things that have been said tonight that I clearly did not understand because of all of and some of the information that was given. And so I voted with clear understanding, but there's some conversation that has been had here that has really just confused me in some of the areas that we spoke about. And so I will be addressing that to the person that I need to, because I see faces in the audience. I see people who are not happy with some of the votes or some of the conversation. And as a community member, I still have to walk and live in this community. So I'm not always sitting at this table as a voting member. I'm a community member first and foremost. So I don't have an expertise as a lawyer or a doctor or a 15-year veteran in this information that has been doing for the settlement agreement. And so I respect the people that sit at this table, and I respect the people that sit in this room, and I respect the people that have put this, that have gotten us here this far. And so I do really believe in the change that we are looking to have for the future and in the city that we live in. So I'm just feeling a little overwhelmed, and I wanted to share that with you guys publicly about some of the things that have been addressed through this process for the last 6 months. And I became a voting member. This is just my second time sitting at the table, and I have been here every step of the way with everything that I can possibly understand, and it has been some confusion from the beginning. So I don't want to mislead and disrespect any of my elders that sit at this label that have a belief in something that I can do, because I'm a human being. And if I don't understand something, I want to make sure you guys know that I do not understand some of the bylaws and some of the information, because I really do respect the police officers that sit in this room, the doctors, the lawyers, the community members, everyone that has been taking their time for us to get an understanding. So I'm not just going to sit up here and put this up just because everybody else did. So I just want to let you guys know how I feel about that. And I don't want to pat on the back about anything later, because this is my life. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to point out something that I hope we will think about. We never have enough time to do all the things we need to do. And we need to come up with some innovative ideas on what to do about that. They may have to do with communication. We are committed to doing a better job of getting you your agendas faster, and with your reading materials long enough in advance so that you can take a look at them and think about them. And perhaps we'll be looking at how to format things so that when you get them, it will be easier for you to make decisions and make your notes and bring them with you. But we never get enough time. Every agenda always leaves something off, and I would appreciate your input and thoughts on what we might do about that. Any way you want. Call me up, send me an email. Philip.
So one thing that I wanted to mention as a concern is when we take things off of the agenda and move it on to the next agenda, that's just adding a
Yes.
longer list for things, and
Yes.
we're always playing catch up. It never stops.
Yes.
So taking things off the agenda, I mean, maybe we need 3 meetings a month. I don't know. I mean, I'm realizing one meeting is... I'm just realizing that I'm just saying, because we keep taking things off and then it moves to the next month and it moves to the next month and that gets longer. And then we have to run out of time and it keeps moving to the next month. Yes, we need to get it under control once we're caught up. I feel like, yeah, we could have less meetings then. But I'm just saying right now it's out of control. We're always playing catch up.
Thank you, Philip. He expressed my feelings very well. And when I think about the fact that there are other people you need to hear from that are going to take an hour, hour and a half, that's half the meeting. That doesn't include your subcommittee reports. It doesn't include any discussion you might want to have on recommendations, any new thoughts, ideas that you may want to explore. So I'm asking for help. Thank you. Can I get a motion for adjournment? Okay. All in favor? Do I have to say? No. Okay. Oh.
Who gave the motion?
Sharon did. And who didn't?